State legislative session is winding down in Boise. We'll have perhaps some time to talk about that a little later in the program. Doing that today if we can. I say if we can because this is the last day of the show being live this week. Tomorrow morning, Good Friday is a company holiday, so a great many of us will not be in this building. There will be no top story tomorrow morning. We'll return on Monday. In the meantime, I wanted to open the show today talking about great moments in the history of the presidency when it specifically comes to rhetoric. And we've had quite a bit of it this week while the president was observing various issues going on in his well, I don't want to imply that he's a Marxist-Leninist. I guess I've done that before. But while he was in Cuba, he obviously had a wonderful time talking to a lot of people who he has a great political kinship with. He has been roundly criticized the last several days by a great many people, even on his side, for spending the day at a baseball game or much of the day at a baseball game in Havana after the Brussels terrorist attacks. Now, I had a slightly different take on this. You really can't put the genie back in the bottle. If he rushes back to Washington, the attacks will not undo themselves. They happen, and we've got to deal with it, right? That's how you look at it. And secondly, he's not entirely out of communication with various staff people and the like. But if liberals have criticized George W. Bush for sitting through an elementary school class after getting news of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which he did for several minutes before he got up and made some remarks about what was going on and then flew back to Washington to handle the crisis, then I guess a lot of people could say, well, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and you could criticize President Obama. He's been retired now for a number of years from the NBC Nightly News. Tom Brokaw anchored that program for many, many years. Brokaw is an avowed liberal. He didn't talk about it much while he was on the air, but he used to pal around with, among his best friends, Robert Redford, who is one of Hollywood's biggest leftists. So Tom Brokaw's his views are very much left of center. Brokaw appearing yesterday morning on MSDNC, and take a listen to this man rip into the President of the United States, taking on his fellow traveler.
You know, so much of politics and national security is a combination of symbolism and reality. The reality is that we did have that attack yesterday. It was unnerving to us. It was devastating in Europe. But at the same time, the symbolism is that the president stayed at the baseball game all day long, where you would have thought he would have said, look, we've got more business that I have to deal with. I wish you well. Get on the phone. We've got to put together some kind of a bulletproof syndicate to deal with all of this. There's a real urgency about it, and he's got to convey that, not just to the American people, but to the world. I think it was Mike Hayden who said earlier that he is the leader of the free world, and this is a time to be the leader. Because this kind of attack can occur again and again and again.
Oops. So I guess you would expect, after being chided by one of his fellow travelers, Mr. Obama might finally say, after all, he's not running for anything now, he might finally say something along the lines of, look, occasionally I make a mistake. But no, he was questioned about it during a news conference in Argentina yesterday. If you looked at the Drudge Report today, there are pictures of Mr. Obama tangoing while visiting in Argentina. Yes, I mean, I'm not making this up. He is tangoing as Europe burns, and he was asked about his decision, and listen to what he had to say. Here is a great moment in presidential rhetoric.
Groups like ISIL can't destroy us. They can't defeat us. They don't produce anything. They're not an existential threat to us. They are vicious killers and murderers who've perverted one of the world's great religions, and their primary power, in addition to killing innocent lives, is to strike fear in our societies, to disrupt our societies, so that the effect cascades from an explosion or an attack by a semi-automatic rifle. And even as we are systematic and ruthless and focused in going after them, disrupting their networks, getting their leaders, rolling up their operations, It is very important for us to not respond with fear. As I said, that's hard to do because we see the impact in such an intimate way of the attacks that they make.
So I guess liberals all over the world were just blown away by this brilliant rhetoric and his emotional response, and they're just all standing back saying, gosh, that's what really needed to be said in a moment of crisis. And it made me ponder a little bit how this compares perhaps with some other great moments of rhetoric in history, not just American history, but in European history as well. And I was thinking, of course, about some of his predecessors.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
I guess Mr. Obama could look somewhat small next to that, or maybe even this.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
We should note, though, it's not just, great American leaders who have had great remarks in moments of crisis, but there are people throughout the world.
We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Although we should be confident because Mr. Obama is only in office a few more months, and then we could have someone, obviously, who has a much better approach to leadership. Yes, we're very much looking forward to that. Telephone number, if you'd like to reach Top Story with Bill Colley today, is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Coming up on 8:15, it's 44. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, the other day I was talking to a close friend of mine, a lady that is extremely informed and proactive, and she depressingly told me, I don't think there's enough of us left who care or care to know or care to do anything to save the country. And it was such a depressing thing. And you say to yourself, by God, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to fight on. And when you try to talk to some of these people, like I've said, it's like they don't hear a word you say. They just cheer at everything Bernie or Hillary says. And you go, God help us. And I'll hang up, Bill.
Thank you for the call. Yes, Bernie says, I'll make sure everything is free. Everything's going to be free, and I'll make somebody else pay for it. Who's that going to be? Well, I'm going to take all the money away from everybody who's rich. Well, how are you going to do that with whose army? Well, I'll make sure I give free stuff to the army. You see the direction we happen to be going with all of this in this country, no matter how you slice it. We're headed more and more towards a totalitarian approach where government simply is going to force people to do things against their will. If you took the bank accounts and the investments of all of the so-called 1% in this country, you took all of that money and said, we're going to redistribute this to the poor. Then in 6 months after the poor had spent all of that money, there would be nothing left for you to redistribute. And the people who actually created these businesses that created all of this wealth and created jobs and all of that, they wouldn't have any more money left to invest. It's just how that seems to work. But no one seems to care. So you've got the president standing in Argentina being asked about what's going on with the threat from, as he calls it, ISIL. First of all, that's a dead giveaway. He refuses to call it ISIS because that would acknowledge some of his mistakes in bringing this to the forefront and creating this situation. In fact, Rudolph Giuliani, speaking last night with Bill O'Reilly about this on the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News, Giuliani says that both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are responsible for the rise of this terrorist network.
If you're talking about doing what she wants to do, which is to rally our forces against ISIS, you got to come back to the White House, you got to sit in the Situation Room, and you can't leave until you come out with a plan.
Well, he doesn't want to do that. Barack Obama doesn't want to rally anybody. I mean,
she had her chance to do it. She helped create ISIS. I mean, Hillary Clinton could be considered a founding member of ISIS.
How did she help? Because we have a guy, an expert coming on about ISIS. How did she help ISIS?
By being part of an administration that withdrew from Iraq, by being part of an administration that let Maliki run Iraq
into the ground.
Into the ground. So you forced the Shiites to make a choice. By not intervening in Syria at the proper time. By being part of an administration that drew 12 lines in the sand.
And didn't do anything. But remember,
and
I want to be fair to Hillary Clinton. As Secretary of State, she could not force Barack Obama to do anything. The only thing she could have done was resign.
Yeah.
That's
right.
it. That's it.
Which is what a patriot does.
You know, we could point out that, of course, we have a Latino contingent that likes to telephone the show and claim it's all George Bush's fault. And that, you know, so George Bush is responsible for all of this. But you've had 7 years, almost 8 full years of a group of people who said that they would solve all of this. And they didn't. They just went in there with a big old stick and they just kept swatting at that hornet's nest at every chance they got, whether it be in Iraq, Syria, or Libya. And this is the result of all of that. So, all right, I'll acknowledge George W. Bush and some of his planners, they goofed. But you know what? We were told, and the reason that Barack Obama got elected was because he was going to bring the troops home. He was going to bring an end to this. There would be peace throughout the world, and that everyone would have everything they ever wanted. It would be utopia. You'd have free health care and free food, and, well, of course, the rise in food stamps, many people actually believe that. They just haven't seen who's paying for it all. So you ended up going with all of this because these people said they were problem solvers, and they've only made things worse. 8:19. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Before we get to our first break of the program, I do want to mention our friends at Tint Lady. They have a new address. They're down on Filer Avenue. In fact, they're at the corner of Filer and Washington. And they'd like you to drop by and say hello if you get a chance, and you can discuss some of the products. In fact, they put in window tints in homes, offices, also in your automobile. That'll protect furnishings. It'll protect a lot of your valuables from those harmful UV rays. But it will also, on really hot days, reduce that convection heat, and that'll save you money on your air conditioning use and eventually pay for those window tints. Get a free estimate today. Telephone 736-8469 or go online at tintladyidaho.com. This is a business now in operation locally, owned and operated for nearly 25 years. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only, closed Sundays. And remember, don't squint, get tint. I've got more coming up. We should be joined by Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department shortly.